Welcome to the Bible Savvy Podcast, a weekly conversation about how to understand, enjoy, and apply God's Word. It's time to jump into a new passage from the Bible Savvy reading plan.
Hey, Bible Savvy Nation. We're here again, and David has another question for us. What is it?
Yeah. Okay. Today's question is, which emoji do you overuse the most? Which emoji?
None.
You're not an emoter?
I'm an old man, and I don't. Okay, so probably the crying, laughing emoji, because it is a way of saying that's funny. Oh, yeah, with the sideways one, or the one with the tears or whatever, or just the skull or something like that. Like, yeah. I try to keep up with the times.
Yeah.
But
get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn. The truth is, I don't particularly find emojis helpful, but like some version of a smiley face is occasionally good, or maybe a thumbs up. But those are basically like, I don't know, those are old man things to do.
But it will give your texts some tone.
There you go, some body language.
Like if you just send the text, like you can say all kinds of offensive things and throw in that smiley face.
I want people to wonder what the tone is. I want it to be like when we're reading the Bible and like Jesus says something and you're like, I don't know, I got to try that like 4 different voices to see what it is.
It is.
That's what I want.
That's
keep people on
their
toes.
Okay.
No. What about you?
Mine. Well, we talked about the good kind of wrinkles, and that mine is the the laughing face, no tears. Like the one with the
squinty
like
eyes.
Squinty eyes.
Yeah. The laughing wrinkle. Like,
yeah. Like, that's so funny.
Yeah.
That one. I also commonly use the face palm.
Oh, you know what? I use that sometimes.
Yes.
There we go.
That's
we
good.
found
That's
it.
good. We got
There
something.
it is.
It's not that I don't use them. I just I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah. My wife listening, she'll be like dying in the car because she doesn't use any emojis either. She thinks they're like just the worst.
You know what?
She prides herself on like, I will never use an emoji.
Nicole's all right.
Yeah.
She's all right. We grew up together.
She's fine. These Wheaton people.
No emojis in Wheaton.
Yeah,
we don't do that.
Wheaton is void of emojis.
We're too good for that.
My most used honestly is the tilted cry laughing one, to be honest. But recently there's been an uptick. There's been an uptick in the I don't even know what to call it. It's just the eyes that are just kind of like looking to the side, like like what's this about? Like you know, I find it useful in like lots of situations where I'm like, hey, look at this. Like, what are we looking at? Or like, what are you doing? Or I don't know. It's fun. I think it gets people like, whoa, what's going on? So
I will be interested to hear when people walk into church and they start telling us the answer to this question. Like if there are some obscure, or out of the box emojis
or like
that are
drop your emoji in the comments.
You could do that.
You could just drop your number one.
I did have to ask some younger Gen Z people. They've released new emojis, and sometimes I'm like, okay, I actually don't know. Like the melting face, I'm like, I don't know. What does that mean?
Hundreds of emojis. Like, it does not make sense. Okay,
we use the salute a lot in our house.
Truth be told, I read a book about how the algorithm and social media is changing our language, and it had a whole chapter on emojis. So I have like a linguist's analysis of how they work as language, but I don't use them. So it doesn't. It was like an anthropologist, like these with foreign land. Well, how does this work?
Like taking all the fun out of it. Basically.
Adding all the fun in.
Yeah. Well, one day there might be a Bible translation with emojis.
No.
I'll bet it's already out.
No. All right, well, let's get this started before that day comes. We are going to be reading a brand new book of the Bible starting this week, and it's the book of Judges. And this is a book that all books require some context, but this book really helps have context because it confuses a lot of people. If you just read it straight, it is weird and disturbing, and there are stories that you say, why is that in there? So I did an interview with one of our favorites, one of our friends of the podcast, Dr. Sandra Richter.
Yay!
And so we will have that about Judges and about Ruth, which are books that are linked together. And so if you want to check that out, I don't know when relative to this it's going to be released, but fairly soon it should be out there. Things you should know as we're getting into this story. We read the book of Joshua a few months ago, and the book of Joshua is basically the story of the people of Israel coming into the promised land, and their assignment was, you need to go and take over the land, and conquer the people that are here. And they do that for the most part. But there are still some people who remain in the land and some territory that is unclaimed. And as a result, for the next, several generations, they continue to be plagued by invasions and battles between themselves and these groups of people that are there, in large part because they keep getting sucked into worshiping the gods of the people that are there. So we're going to read a bit about that. This passage actually gives a good overview of kind of the pattern that goes along with that. One thing you should know that is very helpful as you begin reading the book is that this is before Israel had a king. And so when we talk about judges, the reason these figures called judges are important is because there was no central leader in the country to rally everybody to respond to a crisis. And so God would raise up individual people that in the translations that we have are called judges. And we'll see as we start to read about that. So let's start reading Judges chapter 2, starting in verse 6.
After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Therefore, the Lord was very angry with Israel and said, "Because this nation has violated the covenant I ordained for their ancestors and has not listened to me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. I will use them to test Israel and to see whether they will keep the way of the Lord and walk in it as their ancestors did." The Lord had allowed those nations to remain. He did not drive them out at once by giving them into the hands of Joshua. These are the nations the Lord left to test all those Israelites who had not experienced any of the wars in Canaan. He did this only to teach warfare to the descendants of the Israelites who had not had previous battle experience. The 5 rulers of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, the Sidonians, and the Hivites living in the Lebanon mountains from Mount Baal Hermon to Lebo Hamath. They were left to test the Israelites to see whether they would obey the Lord's commands, which he had given their ancestors through Moses. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They took their daughters in marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods.
All right. When we do comma, first step is context. We already talked about. The second step is observation. And so this is where we look for details in the text. Sometimes when you read something like this, it just feels like a lot. And the reason we do the observation step, not just jump to like, what are we going to do, is because if we slow down and pay attention, it helps us actually figure out what's going on and get into what's there. So when we do observations, let's remind ourselves some of the things we look for. We call them treats, TRTS. The first T stands for?
Themes.
themes. The R stands for
Repeating words and phrases.
The other T is
truths about God.
And the S is
something striking.
All right, let's make some observations. What do you guys see?
Well, verse 7, where it talks about the people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. So these were all the people who served the Lord were the people who had seen all the great things. They had actually experienced what God had done for Israel. The contrast to that, and kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, is in verse 10. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. So, that first group was this faithful group. The second group, I wrote forgetful, people who had not known. And the note that I put on that was just that they didn't have a personal connection to it. They hadn't experienced or encountered God. They had not seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. So they had likely heard it at some point. I don't think stories were ceased to be told, but they had not had an experience of it. So.
That's sort of my question, right? Because it does feel like a little bit of an indictment of the previous generation of saying, it doesn't say they forgot. It says they just didn't know the Lord or what he had done for Israel. Like that's like the text. Now, I assume there were stories told and things, but were they really intentional? Like, was that like a very important thing to do, or did they just make assumptions, or they lived a life of battle and just sort of took the second stage of life for granted and raised a generation that didn't know him? Like to me, I read that statement. I'm like, oh my gosh, how does this happen?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems remarkable that they didn't pass on their devotion to the Lord. There is it's not explained why, but it's interesting if you think about the generation before the generation that says was really faithful with Joshua. The generation before that was the one that died in the desert. So you got like maybe they didn't have good examples. Like mom and dad never passed it on to me, so I had to learn it from Joshua, and I don't know. But either way, there is some gap that has broken off there, and I noticed that actually in the observation of the repeated word of ancestors and the repeated word of generation. There's definitely an emphasis on the baton passing and whether or not it actually happened. That there's a mismatch between this generation and that, between the ancestors and the current group. And it's pretty sad.
Well, then in verse 12, the word forsook is repeated a couple times, which is a fun word to say, to be honest, forsook. But the text is they aroused the Lord's anger. Which is just a very striking statement. Yeah. Something I hope is never said about me. That they aroused the Lord's anger to the point where, like, you go down to 15, whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he has sworn to them. They were in great distress. So this is clearly like a significant forsaking. They forsook and drove his anger to the point where it's like they thought, okay, well, we'll go out to fight and our destiny's in our hands. Like, it's not in your hand at all. It's God's in control. Yeah. And he's not pleased.
Yeah. It's important to note the covenant that they had with God made space for them to not be perfect. So sometimes we think, hey, this is what the Old Testament is like. You have to be this perfect or otherwise. It's like, well, actually, the agreement they had room for things like sacrifices and ways of dealing with the normal sin of human beings, which is why God made the system that he did, because he knew that we couldn't live with him if we didn't have a way of dealing with sin. The curses that the covenant describes, like that, what makes it so that God will turn against you are things where it's not just garden variety sin. It's not just the ordinary struggle of being human. It's when you have made a decision to cast your lot in with a different God. It's basically saying, you know what? Who am I going to depend on? Who am I going to look to take care of me and lead me? Who am I dependent on? Well, in this case, it says they serve the Baals and the Asherahs and these foreign gods and idols. And so they're essentially saying, you know what? Now that we live here, I think that these gods are going to take care of us. And essentially God says, fine. First of all, if you want them to take care of you, they can take care of you. Second of all, you may not realize this, but I'm at war with those gods. So if you're on their side, guess whose side you're not on? Guess who's against you? And so it's a more serious thing than just saying, well, they just didn't get their act together. It's like, no, they drifted away from the one that said, I'm all yours. And they said, man, we'd rather have them.
Yeah.
No. Well, there is a cycle in Judges, which I'm sure, Clayton, you can probably speak to even better than I can.
I've heard you teach the kids this.
This is, with the kids, we've taught them rebellion, and we have like hand signals
signs
for it. So if you're, watching, but we do rebellion, repentance, and restoration. There's more steps to it. And as I read through this, it's like they do evil. Verse 11, the Israelites did evil. So they do evil. And then there's an oppression. The Lord gave them into their hands of raiders. They cry out. They're in great distress. God raises up judges in verse 16. And then they always forget again when the judge dies. Verse 19, the judge dies and the people return to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors.
Yeah.
So it is a cycle that we are going to continue to see throughout the book of Judges, but it's outlined really well here in these couple of paragraphs.
This passage is very much a overview passage that we're going to see specific examples of all throughout the thing. So that part of the reason why we did this is because this passage actually serves as really good context for the rest. Because if you see, this is always what's going on, you'll start to get the meaning of it as we go along.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I did watch the Bible Project video. Another great way
that's a very
context.
helpful. That's a very helpful one for context,
which is also really helpful in this, and will kind of give you even just the idea of the echoes of what's going to happen now. Throughout the book, how things are going to go. So highly recommend.
And it's more than just a cycle. It's not just like they came back. It's like a downward spiral.
It's very much a downward spiral.
This is the toilet, right? Like that's what they're spinning around.
And I might even mention in Epic, when we read Judges, which we will read Judges in the second half of the year.
Yes.
We stop at about Judges 7, I think, is when we stop, before things get real dark. So if there are parents listening to this thinking,
like, why is that kid's pastor?
Yeah. Is she really going to teach them about Judges? Yes. I'm very excited that we get to return to the book of Judges. Because we get to teach them rebellions, if I can talk, maybe Tim can cut that up. Rebellion, repentance, and restoration. I'm very excited about that. And there are some awesome stories in Judges.
Yeah.
However, parents need to know we're not going to go any further than like Gideon, basically. We're going to stop things.
Yeah. There are the parts of the Bible that are probably the worst in terms of just how horrific they are. They're in Judges. And so it does get very dark.
It's not rebellion light.
No,
it is major rebellion that's about to happen.
Which, by the way, maybe for those of you who have not listened to the interview with Dr. Richter, this is a thing to know. The point of this book is to show how bad it gets when people abandon God. It is to pull back the curtain where we can say, what's the big deal about, not following God? And to say, actually, this is where the world heads apart from that. And also the secondary theme is apart from the king that we need. So by the end of the book, the refrain is, but there was no king in Israel. There's no king. Everybody did what they wanted. Everybody did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
And this is what it looks like. And so it does get very, very dark as it spirals down.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think we get so used to, I read this or heard this somewhere in the course of my knowledge of the book of Judges, about we are so used to the happy ending stories, and we expect that, and we think that God is there is a good ending to this, all of this. I've read it, it's back here, and it's really good, guys.
Spoilers.
Spoiler. But there is value in tragedy literature that we don't just skip over these stories that are tragedies. If we didn't have the book of Judges, it wouldn't be complete. There's not a complete story there. Well,
my next observation goes with that, because in verse 18, it kind of in reference to the covenant you were talking about earlier, Clayton, it says, whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. So even in the midst of their constant rebellion and pushing back, there's a description of the Lord listening.
Yes.
Like relenting. I mean, I think about when I'm in the Starbucks drive-through getting some coffee and my kids are begging for cake pops and Dad, but this is the cake pop place, and just they're mostly I say stay strong, but every once in a while I'll relent and be like, fine, we'll get cake pops, and there will be much joy in my backseat. But like it's a light example, so I do think that there is a level of relationship of father child, like I hear you, I still care for you, even though you constantly push me away. That word relent is a very striking word to me.
Yeah. It is one of the remarkable things about God. That he does that. He doesn't have to. To.
Well, and he just continually sends like little deliverers. Like it's like little bits of redemption. It says he sold them into the hands of their enemies, which means that a redeemer is needed, right? Like there's been something sold, like to get it back, you got to redeem something. And it says whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of their hands, the hands of their enemies, as long as the judge lived. And it's little deliverer, little redeemers along the way. None of them are complete, and we know why. Yeah. But none of them are complete.
Yeah. An analogy for the judges that obviously I came up with here is they're like the Avengers. Okay, so here's why. When you're watching the MCU and you say, what are the Avengers doing when there's no aliens invading or whatever? Well, they're not. Like it's like normal law enforcement is going on. But what happens is when there is a crisis, when someone shows up that's too big for them to handle, these guys show up that are like, look, we can handle this. So God says, here's what I'm going to do. Every once in a while, you need a Captain America or a Hulk or whatever to show up and beat up guys that you can't handle and rally everybody around. But they're not hanging around all the time. So these are not permanent. Like there's no like permanent fixture of like, who's the judge today? It's like, no, when you need it, they show up, and otherwise they're just doing whatever. But I also think that there are times when thinking about them like superheroes is helpful, because you think about the disaster that's left in the wake of the superheroes. At the end of every movie, they're like, hey, we did it. Let's go eat shawarma. But the like city's a mess. There is something like that in these stories where you're like...
and it's going to get worse and worse. Because
it's going to get worse and worse.
That is the hard thing. A lot of children's Bibles, they depict like Samson, again, I don't want to go too far into the story, as Captain America or like this superhero. And I'm always like, no. We should have stopped. At chapter 7.
That's when you get the Captain America. You're like, oh, he's a good guy. And then the later ones, you're like, that's more Tony Stark. Like he's not a good man.
Understand. I'm just going to be honest.
These are great references. That you and my wife listening don't understand.
I was going to say, do you have anything that relates to Toy Story? I'm all over it.
I don't. Another observation I have is the repeated word of test in the second half of this here. It's a weird one to think about, God testing people, because it's not like God needs to know what's going on, but what God does repeatedly in the Bible, from the Garden of Eden on, is put people in places where their character is going to show up. It's when you read about a test in the Bible, it's about making explicit the thing that was hidden. It's a way of saying, in this situation, where your real trust is, where your real character is, that's going to come out, and we're going to be able to see it, and it will be obvious. You can't pretend, you can't lie, you can't act like you're better than you are. It's going to show either you are faithful or you are not. And so in some ways, God says, all right, here's what we're going to do. I know I want them to clear out all these people, but what we need to do right now is show that the people can't do it on their own. And so I'm going to use these groups of people to show where their real character is and their real need is. It's going to test them and expose what's really going on.
There is that little parenthetical statement there at 3:2. He did this only to teach warfare to the descendants of Israelites who had not had previous battle experience.
That is one of the stranger ones, because it seems like earlier on it says, well, actually, it's to test them. The testing seems to be for different purposes, but then there's this parenthetical. It's like, look, it was kind of just a training exercise. So I don't know what to make of that phrase, honestly. But yeah, so there you go.
Well, chapter 3, verse 5 and 6, it's subtle, but the Israelites lived among the Canaanites and the others. And then verse 6, they took their daughters in marriage, gave their own daughters to their sons, and served their gods. period.
Oof, covenant.
It's it's subtle, but it is like, hey, you made compromises. You were just in the world. You were of the world. You combined. You intermarried, and this is what happens. And it made me think of Paul's language in the New Testament when he says, hey, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And knowing, hey, do you remember this story in Judges? Like, they were unequally yoked, and it broke them. They served other gods because they yoked themselves to other nations because they lived among them and just decided to adopt their practices. It's a tragedy, as you said, and a cautionary tale.
Oof. It's like you could have lived in the neighborhood together and not intermarried, but instead you moved into the neighborhood and
the house.
You broke the covenant. I mean, there's little covenants happening. That's how I read that. Was like there's marriage covenants happening, and there's a bigger covenant at play here.
Yeah.
So,
I recently did a Q&A session with some of the seniors in our youth group, and one of the questions I asked is, why is it important to date a Christian? And I felt like on the spot, I was like, oh, I have a good way of saying this. But it was, I told them, because the thing that will make or break your life is who you give your life to. And so the first most important question is like, I gave my life to Jesus, and that's going to be the most important thing. But if you give your life to someone else, which is what a marriage is, you say, I'm going to say, my heart belongs to this person. Guess what? You just gave them influence over your heart. And so if that's what you want to do, and they say, well, I haven't given my life to Jesus, but you've given your life to Jesus, but you've given your life to me, all of a sudden you have someone who is saying, I'm going to influence your heart, and it's going to go one way or the other. It's going to go, and so like we need to take seriously, like there are so many people I know in our church or who have left our church that the reason it happened, the catalyst for that was they got in a relationship, either a serious dating relationship or a marriage, where this happened, and it led them away from Jesus, or they're struggling to hold on to their faith. It's really, really hard.
Yep.
It's really, really hard. All right, let's turn to the M's in comma. Let's start with message here, okay? If you were going to take one of your observations or a couple of your observations and sum them up in a principle, what would it be?
Yeah, my message was, it's kind of a classic, little bit, cliche, but we are one generation away from forgetting, or I debated, is it forgetting or indifference to what God has done? So just the idea, again, there was one generation. After that whole generation gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And if this isn't your warning sign, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, mine's pretty similar. I just said, if you don't disciple the next generation, they will find other gods.
Okay, I guess I should have gone first.
We need to start like rock, paper, scissors. Who gets to go first?
There is a clear message.
Yes. Well, there are a few messages I could have done, but I was like, I'll do this one. Yeah. But I kind of took it from the other direction, not from the parents passing on the faith. I took it from the generation saying, how can I be faithful? So I said, look at those who came before and imitate what made them faithful. I do think that you guys rightly identify like a lot of the responsibility is on the generation that didn't pass it on. But that generation could have said, these guys did it right. It worked for them. Like God was with them and did amazing things. But they didn't look at that and imitate what made them faithful in that situation. All right, for meditation, this is one of those passages where there's not like a great pithy line to just ponder for a while. But I do think that idea of a cycle, right, where they've sinned, they experience consequence, they cry out, and God delivers them, is something that a lot of people can relate to in their personal life. This was a national version of this, but I think a lot of people can say, look, there are things where I keep doing that again and I cry out because I want deliverance and God is kind to me and so on. And so I think for meditation, to take 45 seconds to open yourself up to God and say, God, where are the places where I keep doing this? And what are the things that you want me to do in terms of handing that over, confess that sin to God? All right, let's talk about the A in comma application. What do we do in light of all of this?
Well, my message, similar to all of yours, was we're one generation away from forgetting or indifference to what God has done. And I obviously have a pretty easy application to this, right? Like I'm a mom with kids, and I'm also a children's pastor, so I have
volunteer in kids'
great
world
investment. Well, I mean, that might be your application. It is your application.
I
volunteer in kids' world. Yes. I mean, David still needs to get down there, but
Just gotta call out on
he volunteers in my ministry, in adult ministry. So he's a community group leader.
Tim, can you edit that out, please?
Okay. Next generation would love to hear from David as well. But I had a college professor who used to always say, we need to help kids have Red Sea experiences. So he used to talk a lot about that. Like those children who walked to the Red Sea, like, can you even imagine being one of those kids and like what that would have been like and seeing God's deliverance? And he's like, obviously, like, I don't mean, you got to figure out how to give them these experiences where they, literally walk through a Red Sea. But it's this idea of if we don't tell the story of what God has done and attribute it to him, the next generation will write a new story and they'll attribute it to someone else. And so how do we take those moments and really make God the hero? And that's something that, our family over the years has really tried to do. I remember when we moved here, my kids were pretty young and people kept telling this sad story of us leaving our previous home and church and making it sound super sad. And my kids were really sad about it. And I thought, you know what? I thought of that Red Sea experience moment and I thought, this is a moment that I have to define for my kids that God is doing something new. And there is something exciting about it. It's not that God is taking us away from our friends here, but God is moving us into something new. And there's something exciting, like God is good and he's always the hero of our story. And so how do I help kids to see those things in those moments so that they don't write the story and attribute it to someone else or something else? I just talked to a mom the other day who said her kid has been through this really huge kind of healing experience, and he kind of attributes it to himself and what he did, and he's a little older, he's, high school age. And she said, I just want him to attribute it to God. I want him to see what God has done in his life and to acknowledge that this is who God is, that he would know the Lord, not just, know of, but he would know him. And I want that for my kids. I want that for the kids in our church and our ministry. I want that for the kids in our community. Our kids will be formed by what they're surrounded by. The Israelites became surrounded by, these other things. They broke and made all these little covenants. And so how do we help kids to really stand firm in that? And so obviously that is something that I do weekly, but in the course of my day-to-day life with my own kids, I say all the time, I love that my children are following Jesus and I pray that continues. But when my grandchildren are following Jesus, I will feel way better. I will feel a sense of, okay, we got one generation past, and we've continued to tell the story. God has continued to be the hero. So
that's great.
Yeah. So yeah, very similar. Like I said, my message was if you don't disciple the next generation, they will find other gods. So my application was to share more stories of God's faithfulness with my kids. So yeah, very similar. I just think as I reflect on my own personal experience with Jesus and my extended family's experience with Jesus, I'm struck by the fact that I have hundreds of stories to tell them about the faithfulness of Jesus. I mean, God's provision financially when there was no money, or salvations in the middle of crisis, stories of physical miraculous healing by the Holy Spirit that they don't know. And some of it'll be better when they're older, because my kids are young. Your kids are a little bit older, but I still was struck by, like, I need to share some of those stories with them. Again, I'm not a perfect dad in this area. I'm still learning, but we had a win yesterday. I was telling you this right before we started recording, but my son is just very impressed when I can just like tell him a Bible verse. Like, it's just, we'll be talking and I'll say, well, this is what the Bible says, and he always reacts so strongly, like, Dad, how do you do that? How do you know that? And I mean, he's 7, so it doesn't take a lot to impress him, but he like was struck by this, and I'd never told him, but I actually have an app on my phone that it has little Bible verse memory games and stuff. It's my way of saying, like, I don't want to if I'm waiting in line at somewhere, like I'll pull that out instead of like social media. So I'm actually doing something helpful with my time instead of, wasteful. And so I use it, and it's my way of just kind of keeping scripture close to memory, and it has little scripture memory games. And he asked me yesterday, he's like, Dad, can I get that on the family iPad and like memorize verses too? And he was like really excited. I was like, yeah, buddy, you can do that. Like it's one of those moments of like, we can do it, and we could pick a verse that we could memorize together. And like, he's really excited about it. And I just thought like, this is intentional modeling. Like this is what it means to pass down from generation to generation. I don't want to present myself as I've got it figured out. I'm still learning every day how to parent and disciple and do that. But it can be as simple as like, let's just memorize a verse together, buddy. Like that sounds like a great way to pass on God's faithfulness to the next generation.
That's good. So my message was, look at those who came before and imitate what made them faithful. And so you guys talked about passing on stories. My application is seeking out stories. Mm-hmm. So for me personally, I find that in reading church history. So there's like, the ancestors, long before the ones that I know, we're often very ignorant of the fact that somehow the gospel survived, spread, and thrived for 2,000 years. How did that happen? There are lots and lots of stories. And if you just think of the stories that are in your life or the lives of your family or whatever, you got to multiply that by billions. So, because there's been a lot of Christians. And so there's a lot of stories out there. But also for me in particular, I think an application is to seek out older saints and to ask, okay, how did you do it? And I, in particular for me, just knowing the roles the assignments that I have, is I want to look for people who say, I raised my kids well. Like you look at them, and you're like, hey, your kids like you and they love Jesus. How did you pull that off? You know what I mean? Like that's not an easy feat. That's not an automatic thing. So like what contributed to that? And they might not even know, but you want to spend time with people and just say, maybe I can pick up some of the things. For me personally, for us, like older pastors, there was a guy who was the interim chaplain at Wheaton College. The old chaplain had retired. This guy came in. He had been a pastor at a local church for a long time and was just covering while they were trying to hire the next chaplain. And I looked at this guy and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a guy who is a pastor and retired and like he did the thing. And he was like a good man and like kept like stayed sane and healthy and righteous and whatever. Like, how do you do that? You know what I mean? And you find those people where you say, all right, like, let me look at your life and hear the stories of what happened. Because if I want to do that, it's not a given that I'll do it automatically. I need to actually seek out the stories.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Join us again next Monday for a new episode where we'll be looking at another passage from the Bible Savvy reading schedule. And in the meantime, if you're not following along with the reading plan, check out BibleSavvy.com. Also, you can subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. Email us your questions or suggestions at podcast@BibleSavvy.com. Lastly, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next week.